I wish we would have had more conversations with my father before dementia made him inaccessible.
That's land transition strategist Sonja Howle. The legal side of passing land to the next generation is important, but what happens when the conversations about the future of that land never take place?
There are 43 million acres right now in transition just in the next 5 years. And that's the largest wave of ag land transition in a generation.
For many ranch families, the biggest challenge isn't taxes, attorneys, or paperwork. It's waiting too long to have the conversation.
Most families never see it coming, and that's the transition crisis.
Land transition, family legacy, and keeping working lands working. That's on today's show. And later, why one cattle nutrition expert says yeast is not yeast when it comes to getting more out of your forage. That's on today's episode of the Working Ranch Radio Show. While many of us understand the technical components to estate planning, having the conversations and knowing fully what our options are, well, that's another thing. Hi, everyone. Justin Mills here, host of the Working Ranch Radio Show. Thanks for joining us on our program here today. Sonja Howle will be joining us as we explore a little bit more down that topic, so be sure to tune in here in just a few moments. We'll be jumping into that. Of course, we're also going to switch horses a bit, talk animal nutrition later on, and then meteorologist Don Day will be in as we take a look at our long-range weather. By the way, if you missed something or if you have not gotten caught up to our shows that we've had here more recently, some great episodes, I encourage you to go back and listen to those. You can go to our site at workingranchradio.com, or if you have a preferred podcast provider, you can do it there as well. Click subscribe, and then you'll know every time we kick a new show down, and leave us a ratings or a review. We would really appreciate that as well. Hey, the latest issue of Working Ranch Magazine is headed out. If you don't have it already, you can subscribe by going to workingranchmag.com and start your subscription today, or you can stop by your local Tractor Supply store and pick one up right there off the shelf. And a shout out to the Tractor Supply store in Canton, Georgia, in Casper, Wyoming, in Castle Rock, Colorado, and in Chesapeake, Virginia. Real quick, coming up on next week's edition of the Working Ranch Radio Show, we're going to be talking kind of technology. We're going to be talking with the folks at Cirrus Tags, and also Gabe White with Herd Advisor will be joining us. Well, let's turn towards our program, and joining us on our show here today is Sonja Howle. She is a land legacy advisor there out of the Texas Hill Country. She grew up on a farm and ranch along the Kansas-Colorado border. And Sonja, good to have you here today on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Yes, it's a pleasure to be here, and hello to your audience.
You bet.
Thank you.
So when we look at what we're going to talk about here today, as you and I were talking before we started, I've had guests on our show where we've talked really the technical side of things when it comes to land, family land transitions and how that goes. But there's also things, I think, from your standpoint as you're working with landowners that before, and I wrote this down when we were talking before, is know the why before you sign the will. I thought that was an interesting thing about that. And then we're going to kind of come back to that. But I think before we jump into this discussion about land transition and some of the things that you help families with, is to understand this is coming from deep passion within you, because it was something that happened in your own family that really spurred your interest in being a helping guide to families in their transition from generation to generation with their land. And I want you to explain from your own personal experience why this is such a passion to you.
You bet. Thanks, Justin. Well, as you mentioned, I grew up in a farm and ranch family on the Kansas-Colorado border, and I worked very actively with my dad and grandpa. And actually, it all started with the Homestead Act. Mm-hmm. My family originally came to Kansas in 1872 and took advantage of the Homestead Act with 160 acres. And over the years, that was my great-great-grandparents. And over the years, they've all been involved in farming and ranching. And when my dad and grandpa and I were working on the land, it was about 1,000 acres and mostly cropland and some ranching. They'd had a big lamb operation. I, of course, left after high school and went into a career. I was the oldest of three girls. I became more interested as I got older in the farm and ranch, I guess I should say. And at that point, it was already pretty much sold. but there was some land still remaining. My father, unfortunately, the last 7 years of his life had dementia. And so when he did pass, it was up to my mom and sisters and I to take on that role of transitioning the last of the land. Mm-hmm. And we lived in 3 different states over 3 years. Because I come from commercial real estate and office leasing primarily, I knew how to do a highest and best use analysis and analyze the property. And we went to a commercial broker first in the Garden City area, but there just wasn't a lot of interest. And then somehow we remembered conversations with my father in that he really wanted that land to be a park. And so we worked with a local broker instead and did sell the land to the city. One thing that we really noticed and really impacted me is once we understood the legacy we wanted to honor and the value, current and potential of the land, the decisions were easy. It just really kind of cleared the path. And so I know that a lot of other landowners get very confused and it's overwhelming, all of the details. But if they understand first their values and the values of their heirs and just understand all of their priorities, then it's a lot easier than just to look at the land and see what's maybe possible. Mm-hmm. And that's where my land professional and my land expertise comes in, is I'm able to not only do a really great core values analysis, but also do a really great natural resource analysis on their land and then blend the two and see what might be feasible or possible and see what might fit best. And at that point, I step aside and just let the right mentor or the right person, lead them into the financial and real estate options that they maybe have made the decision on. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of why it became so important to me, is I did see it as it's just a fact of life that women typically are the last owners of the land because they tend to outlive their husbands. Mm-hmm. And it seems like we as the real estate industry do a very bad job of offering landowners options to selling. And that's where I fit in. Mm-hmm. Because I just think, especially for that audience that maybe gets overlooked, I just think it's really important.
Yeah. Sonja, what caught my attention as you were talking there, because it was, very specific and based upon an experience in your own family situation. And as you had mentioned, you said, okay, this is what happens. And then you point them in the direction of the financial side or some of the other directions that they can go. And I think that's interesting because it ties in with what I said at the very beginning, and that I've had folks on our show and we've talked about the technicalities of estate planning and estate transitions. But as you had mentioned, it wasn't until you guys had been working through this before you realized what your dad had wanted. And it sounds to me like the point in all of this is it's not that the technical stuff that we've talked about isn't important. It's going to have to be done at some point. But to know what the family wants before you even go down that road is really what you're identifying, correct?
Yes. And I just think it's one thing that really hit me too is, with that first 160 acres that my family had, and of course, other family members came in and added to that during the Homestead Act, but that first 160 acres was sold 20 years later for $480. Yeah. And that land would be worth almost $500,000 today. And it's not only the land value, but it was the land as an asset, as collateral, as revenue producing opportunity. And that's another reason why I just really feel like landowners need to really look at that really hard before they make any final decisions. And that's that generational wealth.
Yeah. Another thing, and I wrote this down, you said it kind of in passing, and I wanted to clarify it. You said earlier about you wanted to provide folks with the options to sell, and it wasn't necessarily an option of selling, but no, I know, and it's good. I know what you meant, but I want you to go back and clarify that too. Not that it was confusing to folks, but just for the folks of understanding that there are more than other options than selling. And I think that's the point that you're trying to help folks guide through that process, right?
Exactly. And that's why that land study is so critical. Things have changed so much over the last 50 years in agriculture and farming and ranching. And the proprietary tool that we have will tell them about opportunities in agritourism, agroforestry, carbon, renewables, electric vehicle charging stations. It will talk to them about, livestock or other plants that might be profitable as specialty crops. And so, there are a lot of options.
Yeah.
So anyway, and it doesn't have to be 7,000 acres. It can be 700, it could be 70. But every land and every landowner has an opportunity to look at it more closely and more specifically than maybe they ever have before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sonja, we're going to take a break here. And when we come back in our next segment, as you and I were preparing for our conversation here today, you had the opportunity to listen to our previous show here, and it spurred some thoughts in your mind that you wanted to kind of talk a little bit about. Because one of the things in our last show that we had, and we were talking with 3 different landowners across the country that were dealing, and a lot of them were dealing with lease land. And you're like, man, I mean, we need to get the right people hooked together in this. And that was something that you felt like is maybe some opportunities out there that we in the agricultural industry can work together through. I want to visit with you more about that and your thoughts and ideas on that, because I know there are a lot of producers, a lot of guys like myself, like our guests that we had on the last show, that are leasing land and or wanting to lease or lease more. And I think if we can have a dialogue on that and your thoughts on that will be helpful for them as well. So we'll do that when we come back, okay? Agoro Carbon works with farmers and ranchers to implement practices that promote soil health and add a new revenue stream. Now, when you work with Agoro Carbon, you'll gain a partner that provides flexible payments and local agronomic expertise for your row crop or your range or even your pasture operations. Partnering with Agoro Carbon is an investment in your land and your ranch's future. Get started today at agorocarbon.com.
Horn flies stressing your cattle? Make fly control one and done with Alticid IGR XRB. Alticid IGR XRB delivers season-long horn fly control from a single application bolus, providing up to 195 days of relief regardless of mineral consumption or location. It breaks the horn fly life cycle with no impact on beneficial insects, giving you flexible, consistent control. Learn more at cargillanimalnutrition.com/Alticid bolus.
All right, Sonja, as we get into this next segment here, I'd led into the fact that you had the opportunity to listen to our last show where we were talking with other producers. One of the subjects that came up was the lease, that a lot of folks are in situations where they're leasing, would want to lease, and those kinds of things. And later on here, after you kind of talk a little bit about this, I know you're going to touch on some subject here regarding the 2024 USDA 10-year ownership and transition land survey that came out. Some new information that kind of affirms what you've already felt or what you already have talked with folks about. But as we start in this, what was your conclusions after listening to the last show? And you're finding like, oh man, if more landowners knew about folks that are wanting lease land, if we could get all that tied together, there would be some great opportunities. And I want you to explain kind of your thoughts coming away from that show.
Yeah, I thought it was very interesting. As I mentioned, they were great guests, and they're all very well-respected operators. Dallas Mount, of course, with ranch management consultants. Zach Hobson and Paul Foster, they represented operations in East Texas to Wyoming to even what Zach had just started leasing land in Kansas. Part 1 and Part 2 were great shows, but one thing that really struck me is they're running significant portions of their operations on leased land, and finding land to lease is becoming a crisis for them. And I was just amazed because, frankly, I would pay them to use my land, as well respected as they are as far as operators. And so the key there is, the landowners side, millions of landowners, they hold agricultural acres, but they don't farm and ranch. They genuinely love a qualified operator, but have no idea a rancher is even looking for land like theirs. And we'll get into why that is in just a second. There is definitely a disconnect between willing landowners and land-hungry ranchers. It's not a shortage problem. It's a visibility and planning problem. The land exists, but the bridge between the two parties doesn't. And when I looked at the U.S. Census 10-year land survey, what it took into effect is like the total U.S. acres, 2.26 billion acres, 52% of those acres are in agricultural use, and 2/3 of those are for grazing. And keep in mind, my focus is primarily on the Plains and West. And the land base is actually contracting, but development, energy leases, and absentee transitions are converting productive ranch land faster than new operators can replace it. Another thing about that market, let's just look at the scale of the leased land market. Believe it or not, about 38% of the 900 million acres of farm and ranch land are leased. So that's about 350 million acres. And so the leased land market is enormous. The problem isn't the size of the markets, it's who controls access and why. And here's the key. Almost 80% of all rented U.S. farmland is owned by someone who doesn't farm or ranch. So there's 2 million landlords controlling 350 million leased acres, and the vast majority have never pulled a calf or moved a fence line. And think about this. If you're not in the industry, how much do you really understand what, is a successful way to run an operation in that industry? Do you know who to contact? Do you know your resources? That's, I think, a lot of the problem. This 80% of all the non-operating landowners, they are private individuals, there are trusts, and there are family legal entities. And when ownership changes through death, inheritance, or sale, so does everything else. One phone call from a solar developer can erase 40 years of grazing history. And there are 43 million acres right now in transition just in the next 5 years. And that's the largest wave of ag land transition in a generation. 20% of them have no transition plan whatsoever. And 42% of those will transfer by will only, without any guidance, strategy, family conversations, just a document and a dispute waiting to happen. So when a lease expires, an owner dies, or a family finally sits down together, that moment determines whether working ranchers keep access to the land or lose it. Most families never see it coming, and that's the transition crisis. So 23 million acres are expected to sell to a non-relative in the next 5 years. Open to the highest bidder, energy developers are already in the room. And why can't ranchers find the land to lease? There are 6 really key reasons here besides those statistics. There's no open market. Existing leases renew invisibly to the same tenant for decades. There's no listing, no competition, no visibility for anyone outside the arrangement. Now, the exception is Common Ground in the Midwest. They do a great job of trying to be successful for the landowner and the new tenant. However, when you come to Plains and West and grazing land, the economics are very different. A leased acre in Illinois on great cropland may lease for $200 to $300. Whereas grazing land, like in West Texas, may be as low as $10 an acre. So that's probably why, of course, Common Ground is focused in that area. But there is no key really to the Plains and West. The second reason, energy developers are very sophisticated and they move first. They run organization departments that just do outreach campaigns. Third, there's institutional buyers, investors, large-scale investors are purchasing ag land and converting it away from grazing leases or permanently removing acres from the ranching and farming economy. I remember when I was growing up, we used to let certain land rest. Over the years and over the decades. Now we understand that just letting the land go fallow is probably one of the worst things you can do as far as letting it rest. I remember seeding that same land with Milo. The seeds didn't sprout. We had to actually go back into the co-op and put anhydrous ammonia on that field in order for it to actually grow. And then the fourth thing is, a 20 to 40-year energy lease is going to lock out agriculture for that amount of time. And then number 5, heirs don't know their tenant. When ownership passes to the next generation, the relationship is gone. And then 6, absentee owners have no plan and no one to help them build one. Without guidance, the plan of least resistance, selling or signing with whoever showed up, wins every time. So there's a core problem of an advisory gap. Most landowners make decisions about millions of acres alone. No advisor, no framework, no conversation about what the land actually means to them. So no one's helping landowners understand what the land is worth as a productive leased asset or partnership asset beyond what a buyer might offer today. There's no connection to operators. No one's connecting landowners with qualified ranchers who might steward the land well and value the relationship long term. There's lease literacy.
Yeah.
Or illiteracy, I should say. No one's walking owners through the difference between a 35-year solar lease and a 3-year grazing lease, or even between a lease and a partnership agreement that has a lot more control, or is more of a perceived control for the landowner who can keep the land and maybe work with that new operator as a partner. And then finally, the legacy is left unasked. No one's asking what the land means to them and what they want it to mean to the next generation.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Sonja, let's take a quick break here. And when we come back, I want to talk a little bit about that gap specifically and what you're doing. I know it's something that you especially focused on in terms of providing that assistance, that help for landowners, ranchers, and so forth. So when we come back, we'll do that.
Imagine keeping your cattle exactly where you want them, while being able to tap into insights powered by a collar and an app. No Fence is the world's first virtual fencing system for grazing livestock. From the palm of your hand and delivered with GPS technology, you can set and move pasture boundaries, gain insight into grazing patterns, receive reduced animal activity alerts, and more. No wires, no posts, just empowered grazing that supports healthier land and your herd goals. 10,000 plus producers globally already trust No Fence. Explore the possibilities at nofence.com.
You know, your pasture is under attack. Yeah, horn flies. They're wreaking havoc on your herd, dealing damage to your cattle's weight, and in turn, that does affect your bottom line. That's why you need a solution in your arsenal that can withstand an attack. Alticid IGR is the first and proven feed-through that is battle-tested as an effective hornfly management product, delivering the defense needed to keep your herd productive and your profit strong. Win the battle for your cattle. Learn more at alticidIGR.com. All right, Sonja, some stark realities that you shared in the last segment about basically a real gap that we're seeing in our industry. I mean, you talked about going through the latest USDA results and land survey results and how much land transition is going to take place. And I know for a lot of us in the industry, there has been and there continues to be even more and more concern about losing production agriculture land and it leaving and never returning back to production agriculture. That is a real concern. And so as you've highlighted some of those stark realities in the last segment, I want to talk about some of the things where you see we can bridge these gaps and we can kind of start to pull this together. I know it's something that you work on as well with your Legacy Compass, and explain kind of how we can start to maybe bridge that gap. And hopefully the idea is that we can come up with some great solutions where we're not losing productive agricultural land out of ranching families and staying in production agriculture, and yet still providing a good inheritance or legacy, such as your company is, for the generations.
You know, this is all based on what I wish we would have had. And keep in mind, I had a commercial real estate background in leasing. And so I kind of guided our family's land transition. But what I wish we would have had was just a reminder about our values and continuing the values of my family and my father. And then the land study, we had that because I was able to provide that. I guess, so that's what I've designed is doing that. But I have a third step, and that's that proprietary tool that puts those two things together and provides a legacy compass for land. And keep in mind, land is usually the biggest asset for most people. And so what to do with that is very important. So what I do is there are several gates, 4 decision gates from values to alignment. And that's the values gate, And not only the landowners, but the heirs are also surveyed as far as what their values are or their priorities. And Dallas and Zach and Paul talked about it too, with their $50,000 investments. It was based on priorities and their values. So you can substitute priorities with values to make it a little easier to understand and less complicated. But thanks to my real estate background, I've got some great software and tools to actually do those land studies that are very, very effective and very extensive. And then, like I said, we have our tool to look at that study and make sure that based on the client's desires, what's realistic, what's legally and financially possible. And then once we integrate that together and kind of make 2 or 3 decisions, the landowners and their family know what direction to go. And thanks to my knowledge of the industry and my contacts, I'm able to provide them with the right mentor or the right geographic expert to go the next step. But the key is they have their why before they get into their wills and anything else. It's just a matter of matching and protecting the landowner's legacy from being sold by default. So that is what my company does.
Yeah. Sonja, I can't help but think, and it kind of ties a little bit back to where we started from, but as we bring all this together, because I think we want to provide, okay, what's the next step for folks? I know younger generation of folks listening probably aren't having to make these decisions, but they're probably maybe dealing with a parent or a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle that is potentially looking at that and having to make that. And I can't help but think that one of the things that it keeps coming back to, and as you identified, and one of the things that you can do with is looking at all the assets or all the abilities that land has and creating, being able to have some value. It gets back to, I think for a lot of folks, they only feel like they've got 2 options, and that is sell it or you try to pass it down and it eventually sells. That really is I think that's what you've identified as a main issue. And what you're saying is there's more.
There's a lot more. Exactly. And I think that we as an industry also need to make sure that we're reaching out to, those attorneys that handle and the banks that handle the trusts and just let them know that we might have some other option for them. I think that's really a key too. And that's why my company will probably be doing even more outreach in social media and, business to business with some of those entities, because it's really critical that they know that they have that as an option.
When I think about next steps for producers, and as I had said before, the different types of folks that could be listening and are listening to the show, what do you feel next step for them that might be at that point of asking that question, or might be at the brink of saying, maybe it's not today, but they see it on the horizon. Maybe it is today, maybe it's not, but it's on the horizon of knowing that a decision is going to need to be made about where we go with the land. Let's provide some next steps for them.
Well, a discovery call, I guess, would be great. And it's really a minimal cost to do a survey, the surveys for the landowners and their heirs. It's a 5 to 10 minute survey. Then, of course, the land study, all I need would be their physical address or their who's on the deed or any kind of information that might help me identify where the land is so that I can do the land study. And that's all they would need to get started.
When we started, we also talked about the fact of knowing what the current generation landowner holders want and having those discussions. Next steps in that process.
Well, that's one nice thing about the survey is it will ask each person who's doing the survey to kind of share that information, and maybe they would write down something that they wouldn't share necessarily with a family member at a dinner table or something. That can be probably pretty revealing, but I can also provide anyone with like a sheet on what to discuss. Here are some things that you should talk about.
Yeah.
Envisioning what it is. It's never too late or never too early. Like, I wish we would have had more conversations with my father before dementia made him inaccessible. But fortunately, we did remember some of the most important things, I guess.
Sonja, the one thing you just said there that I think there's several takeaways that I think folks can pull from our show here today. But the one thing that you just said there that I hope spurs some motivation to move forward is you just wish you had had more conversation.
Yes. And you know what? I wish I would have had this research myself. We might have done something slightly different. Mm-hmm. It's kind of frustrating to see my own land report. I just did that last week, as a matter of fact. And here's another thing, too. I mean, this is not just for families that are transitioning. This is for any landowner at a crossroads wondering if they should change cropland to regenerative grazing, or should they do something else with their land? That's the beauty of my land study. It's not limited to just people who are in transition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point, because I think sometimes we feel it has to be a major life-changing situation that has to happen. But I know there's a lot of folks that look at just, and I'm going to give you an example, and I'm not necessarily advocating I'm for or against a conservation easement. I mean, to each his own, they have that ability. But I think that's sort of been, people feel like, I need to do a conservation easement because we're wanting to do something different. That's not the only option in the book today. There's lots of other options. And I think that's what you're trying to say, folks, here's some options.
Well, and especially in the Plains and West. I mean, I drive up Highway 83, the 12 hours north to see my mom and sisters in Kansas. And throughout the Plains and West, I'm sure there's a lot of land and acres that really could use some stewardship.
Yeah. One thing that I ask my guests that are on the show before we leave, I'll make sure you give us all your contact information for folks to reach out. But before we do that, real quick, a podcast, a book that has helped you or you feel would be helpful for folks that you could pass along as just kind of for their own professional development?
Well, the attorneys I work with who have done the technology behind the core value studies, they wrote this book that really, really provided me with a lot of inspiration as far as the emphasis on values. And keep in mind, I've been, in advertising and marketing for a long time. So studying people's values is a great way to understand how to talk to them. And even understanding someone else's values is a great way to talk one-on-one. If you know what's important to them, you have a great sense of who they are. But they wrote this book called Riveted, 44 Values That Change the World. And they talked about the value of beauty from Theodore Roosevelt and how it inspired the National Parks movement. They talked about Claude Monet's value of artistry and how it was such a commitment to him to actually do the lily pond in his backyard and then create the incredible masterpiece. So that really puts actions to attributes. And I just think that, to me, it was really inspiring and made me think of my own values and how do they show up in my life?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's the one I would recommend.
I like that phrase you just used, putting actions to attributes. I like that phrase that you put right there. Okay, Sonja, great discussion. But folks, if they are interested to find out more or to visit with you, how do they do that?
Well, my website is sonjahowle.com, SonjaHowle.com. And my contact information is there. And of course, my email is Sonja@sonjahowle.com.
All right. So very good. Well, a great discussion and really bringing to light probably an issue that became very clear as you voiced it to a lot of folks and realizing, oh, yeah, I see where that disconnect is happening, that gap is happening, and we see where we potentially could see a little bit different value than just the one or two options that we felt we only had as landowners or as families making that transition. So appreciate the discussion. I think it was very helpful, not only for me, but for folks listening as well. And thanks for being here today on the program.
My pleasure, Justin. Thank you, and thanks to your audience.
You bet. And our guest joining us on the program today, Sonja Howle. If you want to reach out to her website, as she had said just a moment ago, SonjaHowle.com, land legacy advisor, guiding and helping folks with making some of these types of decisions and opening up the doors to those conversations that can really help families pass on that potential generational wealth through the land value that they have in their particular operations. Well, stay with us when we come back. Earlier in the program, I talked about we're going to be talking nutrition. Yeast is not yeast is not yeast. Well, what does that mean? Stay with us. In the next segment, we'll explore that.
A high-functioning rumen drives herd performance, gut health, and profitability. Levucel SC by Lalaman Animal Nutrition is the only natural occurring rumen-specific active dry yeast probiotic selected to optimize rumen function, boost fiber digestion, and help you get more out of your forage and feed. No matter how you supplement your herd, including Levucel SC can help your cows do more on what they already have. Discover the right formulation for your herd at chooselevucelsc.com.
Leverage the cattle fly and insect control solution that refuses to be average. ProZap Protectus Pour-On Insecticide IGR. Now, this isn't your average pour-on. It's a triple active solution you can count on. An insect growth regulator, adulticide, and synergist all working together to knock down profit-robbing insects that affect cattle health and your bottom line. Ready to use as a pour-on for season-long control of lice, which means less time in the chute and more time getting things done. For fewer treatments and less handling that pays in dividends, choose Protectus. Talk to your Neogen rep or order through your distributor today. Visit prozap.com for more information. And joining us now here on the Working Ranch Radio Show is Melissa Jolly Brydup with she's Beef Technical Services at Lalaman Animal Nutrition. And Melissa, good to have you here today on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Thank you, Justin. I'm so excited to be here talking with you and getting some of this information out to producers to be able to utilize.
When we look at animal nutrition in our industry, it's not a relatively new term, but I would say it's relatively new in the last maybe 20 years in some ways, where we really start looking at gut health in these animals. And similar to us in humans, it's also a terminology we've heard about as well, but it's something that we really see a lot more focus on is probiotics.
Yes, absolutely. Like you mentioned, it's relatively new here in the beef industry, but, with us humans, we've used the same, I'm going to say the same, because some of these strains are similar when we look at them across humans as well as for livestock. And I'm just going to point out one of them is our Saccharomyces cerevisiae boulardii product, which is our paternative. But when we talk about probiotics, one thing we have to remember is these products are alive, active organisms that these cattle, we're going to, obviously talking about cattle today, would be consuming. And so when we think about different yeast products, the terms prebiotic, probiotic, postbiotic, symbiotic, they all get thrown out there. But just being able to understand what they are and what they mean and what they do is really important, I feel, in the industry today. So again, with probiotics, it is a live, active organism that the animal is going to consume to then elicit a certain response based on the strain of the organism that those cattle are consuming.
When we were talking before we started, you said something to me that kind of perked up in my ears a little bit, and that is the terminology you used was yeast fatigue, and that not all are the same. I want you to explain that, because I think sometimes this is maybe a terminology that is in, and we see a lot of it in our nutritional talk that we have today in our industry. But when you start talking and you say something about yeast fatigue and not all are the same, explain what that means.
Yeah, so they're not all the same because there are thousands of different strains. There's yeast products out there for baking that are specifically used for baking. There's a specific yeast used for distilled spirits, ethanol production, etc. And again, being specific for what they are used for. And so when we talk about animal health and gut health, we really need to be using those strains that are specific or have specific responses and are researched back to prove those responses, in the industry. And so when we talk about our rumen-specific live yeast or our hindgut-specific live yeast, again, having that specificity to show and demonstrate that this is what this product is designed and at the end of the day needs to be used for.
Yeah.
So yeast is not yeast is not yeast. Again,
Okay.
It's different strains that perform the best for different goals and different functions.
So as we had talked about as well, the focus of what you guys have really been looking at is the cow-calf, the stalker type folks as well. And we're at a time right now where we're heading into green grass, or for some of us, we hope there's going to be some green grass.
Right. Yes, I hope so.
But with that in mind, let's talk about the use of that, or the necessity of that gut health, even on green grass.
Yep. So, most producers, when you turn out on green grass, you think, oh, they're out there, they're going to get everything that they need. Inputs should be minimal because should be meeting their energy, their protein requirements on that lush green grass. However, as grass grows, we know that there's a lignin component, which is not digestible by the animal. But when cattle consume it, like I mentioned, it's not digestible. And so how can we help set that animal up for success to get the most nutrients, the most energy out of those plants? And one way to do that is by providing a probiotic. Our Levucell, our rumen-specific active dry yeast, it does that. It supports that. So with it being a live yeast, we're shifting that rumen microbiota population to a more fiber digesting rumen conditions, more favorable conditions for that animal. It promotes fiber digestibility, is actually, like I mentioned, changing that rumen population. So we get more nutrients, more fiber, more energy out of that green grass. And we've got data that supports that, showing that these cows that were consuming Levucell during the summer while they were grazing through loose free choice mineral actually put on a half a body condition score at the end of the grazing period, and weaned calves that were 22 pounds heavier. And when we compared those to the control cows that were out there grazing the same forage types in similar pastures or neighboring pastures, we could all be contributed to an improvement in fiber digestibility. Mm-hmm. That even though it's on green grass, you think you're getting the most out of it, but how can those animals be as efficient as possible, especially in times of these high calf prices and things kind of going on in our industry today?
Mm-hmm. Well, let's say when you were talking about that, even in a situation where guys are moving out to green grass and there is grass available for those, as you were talking about that and getting the most use out of that grass as it matures and definitely gets, the older it's going to get, or the drier it gets, the less digestible it's going to get. So even in a drought situation, there's some value to this, I would say, as well, right?
Absolutely. Yep. And so, but that's one area, that we like to focus on, is that lower quality, more drought stricken grass, but then also just highlighting that we can see improvements on the green forage as well. But yes, you're correct that, in that later mature, drought-stricken grass, we do see those improvements. And like I mentioned, we see that just because of this improvement in breakdown and just setting that rumen up for success and to be as in those favorable conditions and as healthy as possible. Yeah.
Well, I think as a producer, for a lot of us, if we're going to figure a cost per day, definitely when we're in the wintertime, we're thinking more cost per day. In the summertime, it's maybe not a per day as much as it is a per month, or how much grass they're consuming. Mm-hmm. We really try to figure out too is, let's be efficient with what we've got out there and what we're putting out there to them. And it sounds like, as you were talking about this, that really that's kind of at the crux of all this, is that, okay, if they're going to consume forage, whether it's good, bad, indifferent, or whatever type of forage, it's how do you get the most out of it? And that's really what you're trying to achieve with it, a good probiotic plan in your program.
Absolutely, yes. Having that probiotic in there, and I mean, we do need to feed it every day. It does not establish. And so providing that every day to the animal, getting it in their system, and we can see we've got data showing a range of anywhere from 4 to 8% improvement in fiber digestibility across multiple different forage types. So again, hitting that low and high quality. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's just how can we be the most efficient that we can be because of our input costs today. All producers, we need to be as most efficient as possible, and our cows need to be as well.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about the specific product. You've talked a little bit about Levucell and getting that to them. You talked about it being something that needs to be on a consumption basis, on a daily basis. How is that delivered to these animals?
Yep. So great question. So something that's a little bit different for us is we do have an encapsulation product within our Levucell line, and it is our Titan version. And so with it being encapsulated, again, it's protecting that live organism to ensure that we're getting it from production through feed processing at a mill set out to the cow until she can consume it. And so with having the Titan formulation, we're able to put it in basically any sort of feed delivery mechanism. That can be in a tub, a block, cubes, cakes, pellets, liquid product as well, liquid supplement, as well as loose choice mineral. And so a lot of different options for producers out there as far as the delivery mechanism because of our encapsulation process that we have.
Okay. What I like, or what I'm hearing about this, is that, okay, here's the probiotic that you can use. And now if you as a rancher want to, put it in whatever sort of product that you find, I mean, you can, that's kind of the process that I guess I'm hearing from you in this, is that, for example, like right now, there's products on the market that you buy that already have a probiotic, or might say they have a probiotic in it. What you're saying here is here's the probiotic. If you have maybe it's a cake made, a range cake, or liquid feed, or whatever types of means that you want to deliver this, ways you could implement this in. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yep. So we just only have the probiotic. So you're not kind of strapped to any certain product that already contains a probiotic. We are the sole probiotic itself. Yeah, and it could be added into any supplement, any mineral, any product that for any producer to meet their goals.
Sure. So how do they get a hold of then somebody to say, okay, we're wanting to get ready? I mean, maybe as we get into the late summer, fall time of the year, and guys start getting together their feed plans for the upcoming fall and winter months, for whether it's calves, weaning calves, and they want to put together their feed plan. How do they get a hold of somebody and say, hey, we're gonna be putting this together. I need to get some of this probiotic product to put in my feed?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. And so we've got several different sales folks out there. However, we do use distributors for getting our product out. So at the end of the day, if a producer wants to use our product, they just need to contact their local feed mill, or, check out our website at lallemand.animalnutrition.com. And, we would get their specific feed mill, or however a producer might put together their plan, get everybody in touch. So we can get that product out. Yeah.
And I know I kind of go back a little bit as we talked about the fact that getting, that transitioning time where we see cattle, we're heading into green grass now, but the next transition is going to be moving into the fall time of the year. And, the technologies that are available with the product in those times of the years are important as well.
Right. Yes. Yeah. And like you mentioned, when we start getting into some of those lower quality feeds, especially in the wintertime, yeah, that's even more important, just how we can get the most out of those feeds that we're giving those animals. And with the use of a probiotic, we're able to be able for those animals to digest and get more out of it.
You bet. Well, Melissa, one more time, what was the website if folks do want to find out more information?
Yeah, absolutely. It's lallemand.animalnutrition.com.
And the product that we talked about specifically today was Levicel. Did I say that correctly?
Yes, sir. Yes, Levicel SC, which is our Saccharomyces cerevisiae 1077. We talked about specific strains. So if you see the 1077 number behind our Saccharomyces cerevisiae, you know that that's our Lallemand product.
All right. Well, Melissa, good to visit with you. Some good education there on the probiotic in our industry as a whole, and for our feed additive in our animals. Definitely something that has been a highlight in our human side of business, and it's been very valuable in the cattle side of business. We see it too. So thank you for the information here today.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for having me, Justin.
You bet. And again, that was Melissa Jolly Brydup, Beef Technical Services at Lallemand Animal Nutrition. Well, stay with us. Coming up next, meteorologist Don Day is in as we take a look at our long-range weather.
Fascinated by our wild weather? Now you can learn, appreciate, and understand the weather in your own backyard with the new Tropo Rain Gauge. Having achieved the highest rating of any product reviewed by the weatherstationexperts.com, the Tropo boasts rugged durability, impeccable accuracy, and precision to the 100th of an inch. Visit measurerain.com to order a Tropo today and use code RAINDAY. That's RAINDAY for free shipping and 10% off. Go to measurerain.com.
And joining us now with a look at our long-range weather is meteorologist Don Day. And Don, as you and I were talking before we started here today, just kind of figuring out the route we're going to talk about, and we look at a long-range forecast 7 to 10 days out. And one of the things you'd mentioned, and again, not to keep reiterating what we've talked about, but you had mentioned 3 or 4 weeks ago that the weather that we're starting to see here in June should have happened a month ago almost. And we are seeing that. And that's something that is really kind of unexpected in a way.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the month of May, in many ways, May was a little bit more like March. And here we are in June. We're not far away from the longest day of the year. And summer patterns, like a lot of times this time of year, are set like you're kind of in summer. Like you're looking at the jet stream retreating up into Canada and weakening and staying away. You tend to start to see subtropical moisture being more and more of an influence in the southern parts of the United States. And we've kind of had fits and spurts of that. I mean, we've had some great rain in the south. We've seen some real drought relief in the southeast, the Gulf Coast, the Delta region. We've also seen a lot of precipitation in the middle of the country here over the last couple of weeks, parts of the Western Corn Belt, parts of the plains that needed it. Then you get into other places and, drought conditions continue, and there has not been any late spring precipitation relief. And we also have this burgeoning and growing and expanding El Nino that's out in the Pacific. And so it's a little bit of a weather paradox. We're not seeing a summer pattern with the jet stream, but we have this really strong El Nino coming on. And a lot of things that we would expect to happen this time of year is just several weeks behind still. I think we're going to have early June weather in late June or early July.
Mm-hmm. So with that, as you look 7 to 10 out across the country, as we move from west to east, what do you see happening?
Well, first of all, I think we're going to see somewhat of a similar weather pattern here for another week, which means we're going to have probably another good round of precipitation for parts of the northern Rockies. So I think Montana is going to benefit from another good rain event here over the next 7 to 10 days. Some of that will get into the northern plains. But the southwestern United States, Arizona, California, those areas, which can have dry periods in June, they're waiting for that monsoon to kick in, and it's not yet. And then we're also seeing some drier conditions developing in the mid-Atlantic and parts of the east, but also parts of the northern Corn Belt and Great Lakes. So my theme here for the next 7 to 10 days is kind of a similar pattern to what we've had over the last week to 10 days, kind of repeating itself. So I think what you've experienced here over the last week or two is what you're going to experience for the next week or two.
All right. Well, Don, appreciate it, and we will catch up with you next week.
Sounds good. Thanks, Justin.
You bet. And again, that was meteorologist Don Day with a look at our long-range weather. You can tune in each and every morning to his daily video podcast. You can find the link to his YouTube channel by going to his website at dayweather.com. Today's long-range weather brought to you by long-range epinephrine with 150 days of parasite protection in just one single dose. Find out more at longrangedewormer.com. Down the road of technology in our ranches. That's kind of the framework for our show next week. Shane White with Cirrus Tags will be in as we continue to see the wearable device technology become more and more of a management tool for our ranch businesses. And of course, we're going to be talking GPS tags with Shane White there of Cirrus Tags. Also, Gabe White with Herd Advisor. He will be joining us as we're going to explore a little bit more about their software package and their herd management software. So be sure to join us on next week's edition of the Working Ranch Radio Show. By the way, as I said earlier in the show, if you missed something, you can go back to all of our shows and you can find them through your preferred podcast provider, or you can find it on ours at workingranchradio.com. Well, the Working Ranch Radio Show is a production of Working Ranch Magazine, branded #1 by America's Ranchers. If you'd like to get a hold of me, you can send me an email at justin.workingranch@gmail.com. Thanks for joining us. I'm Justin Mills, and until next time, keep your chin down and your mind in the middle. So long.